Have I always had a good relationship with food? Generally, I would say yes. I think in part our upbringings and our parents' relationship with food will have a big impact on the choices and the experience that we have as children leading into adults. However, I didn't necessarily have a typical upbringing because I grew up in Africa. I spent all my teenage years until the age of 17 living in Zambia in quite some remote areas. So I think in part that exposed me to the impact of malnutrition and undernutrition, like very much in your face, seeing what people who don't eat enough food, who don't get the right nutrients, the impact that has negatively on their health and their bodies. So I think being exposed to that from a young age made me realize just how important food is for health and performance, I guess, as well, for energy, just everyday life, because I could see people who weren't able to get enough energy and how negative that influenced their life. I think as a result, one thing that I noticed, certainly when I went back to Australia when I was young, was that exposure to extreme poverty did have an impact on me and my food choices, more in terms of I probably was a little bit more restrictive when I was younger, my late teens, early 20s, more because I almost felt guilty, like allowing myself to spend money on food or to buy food, because it almost seemed wasteful when I knew so many people who completely went without. So I definitely know when I was like in my early 20s, I'd really struggle to allow myself to like even spend money on a coffee or to go out for a meal. I was probably a little bit more restrictive in that sense, more from not wanting to be wasteful. But also on the flip side, from a health perspective, I think in nutrition and dietetics, a lot of people go into nutrition and go into dietetics and they actually have eating disorders, and they are going in to learn more and almost like feeding that cycle. So I certainly experienced that with some of the people that I was training with, that I was studying with. They had very heavily ingrained eating disorder or disordered eating habits and patterns. And I think one thing that I've seen as we get older, as we get more comfortable in our bodies and we get more relaxed and in who we are, that tends to soften our food choices. So I can see in my early 20s, I don't think I was necessarily restrictive. I was always weight conscious. I was always body conscious. I think any woman, especially that grew up in the 80s and 90s, this is our experience, that thin is best. And that worth is very much associated with our value and our looks. And these are messages and thoughts that can be very difficult to unlearn. It can take a really long time to unlearn. And I think as a result, when I look back into like my early 20s, when I finished as a dietitian, there were certain foods that I had probably on lists of like I would never eat, or I would eat very, very rarely, or I would avoid, usually with the deep reason, motive being of trying to avoid gaining weight or wanting to be as lean as possible. Whereas I think now that I'm in my late 30s, I am much more relaxed about foods, and also getting involved in sport, recognizing that demonizing food actually makes things worse for people. It tends to make them more restrictive. And there are foods that I allow myself to eat, and I include intentionally things like lollies and cereal and Coke and sweets, that stuff that myself from my early 20s would be horrified that I would allow myself to eat because it would be labelled as negative or bad. Whereas I think the more that I've learned about food, the more I've learned about the food psychology, because it is really a lot about food psychology, is that it's not just the food, it's the context around the food, and eating the food isn't bad in itself. It just comes down to the timings, the frequencies, the portions. And when we relax that control over food and we allow ourselves to eat them, then, and we know that we can eat it if we want, the power goes away. Whether it's chocolate, whether it's ice cream, whether it's chips, like knowing that you can eat them. You don't have to eat them, and also educating yourself and being aware of what's in food and the impact of, like, yes, if we overeat over time, that will lead to weight gain. But one meal, one day in isolation isn't going to completely unravel everything. And so this is where I think a big part of getting a good relationship with food and understanding your body is getting clear on what drives you and what motivates you and why things are important, and looking at ways how can we improve all those factors at once. So a lot of the stuff that I do in my framework and the things that I'm talking about with clients is more than just the numbers, because I find that usually the cravings for sugar, the I can't eat that, the control, the thoughts around food, they're linked to something else, or like a deeper sense of self-worth, or trying to get validation from food. And the food and our weight doesn't validate us, it doesn't make us a healthier person. I had a very interesting conversation last year with a guy that I was set up on a date with, who asked me about plastic surgery and if I would get plastic surgery or what work I would get done. And it was a really interesting question, I thought, and it made me realize just how much that I've grown in terms of my self-love and happiness and acceptance of myself. Because I think perhaps when I was in my earlier 20s, I was much more physique focused and wanting to be lean all the time, and like that whole like narrative of like skinnier is better, I'm a better person, I'll be liked more, I'll be loved more if I'm skinnier. Whereas I thought about it and I was like, yeah, okay, maybe I could lose a couple of kilos, I could be a little bit lighter. But what I realized, and it was quite nice to sort of realize this, is like, I don't need to and I don't want to. I'm really happy with who I am, the way that I am. I don't have to think about food all the time. I can eat the food if I want to. I eat it intentionally. If I want the pizza, I'll eat the pizza. But again, I'm not just going to go and eat the entire pizza. I'm going to eat the pizza with some salad. So this is where it comes down to being conscious. It's not a case of I'm never thinking about the food, but I'm aware of like the impact and the cost that I suppose that it can have, or the impact if you eat an entire pizza. It probably is going to be more energy that I need. And so making intentional choices with that. But going back to this conversation about weight and body worth, I think often we're looking for this validation, we're not happy with ourselves, or we have this thought in our head, if we're skinnier, if we're lighter, if we're leaner, if our power to weight ratio is better, then we're going to be liked more, then we're going to be loved more, then we're going to be like valued more, that we're going to be a better human, which isn't the case. Like, we are worthy, we are loved as humans, regardless of what the number of the scale is. That doesn't dictate our worth and our value. And this is stuff that takes time, and it really does take time to work through all those thoughts and all those rules, deconstruct them and create new ones, reframe those old thoughts to create new thoughts that are positive for you, new thoughts that help you, lead you to more positive food choices. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It can take months, it can take years of rewriting those stories. There can be things that can trigger you out of the blue with no rhyme or reason. But it is so worth it, because when you are happy in yourself, I think I always want to look back on myself, like, where will I be in like my 90s, my late 90s? I want to be someone that's active and healthy and strong and have lived a life without regret. There was a lady at the hospital I worked at a couple of years ago. She was 92 and had been sick, had lost weight because she was sick. And one of the things that made me really sad was her talking about, like, she was happy that she'd lost weight. She was celebrating that she'd lost weight. And that made me really sad, because I was like, you're in your 90s and you're still not happy. You're still trying to lose weight. You're still like trying to be less than. And whereas, like, for me, when I'm in my 90s, like, I want to have lived a full life. I want to go and swim in the sea and not care about if I've got a little bit of extra weight on my body. I want to be strong. I want to be healthy. I want to be active. If I've got kids, I've got family, people around me, that I want to be able to live life with them versus celebrating a number on the scale. So yeah, I think getting a good relationship with food, it takes time. It evolves depending on your life circumstances, and I think it's really worth it to get in a place where you are happy with who you are, happy with the way that you eat, and so that it doesn't tie you down, that it doesn't keep you a prisoner in life. And so that is something that I do wish for all the people that I work with, all the people that come across me, that listen to anything that I create or that I share, that you can live a life that you're fueling your full potential.